So let me tell you a story. It is a story about Ivan. Ivan was sitting at home and drinking some vodka. And at some moment, he thought it was a good idea to drive to Ukraine to shoot at some Ukrainians. He put on his uniform and drove off to Ukraine. And that's it. That's where his story ended. So, my advice to all of the Russians is don't be like Ivan. Don't go to Ukraine, or your story will be as short and meaningless as the story of Ivan. Hi everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Welcome to year 2023, a year that I hope will be the year of victory, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole democratic world, obviously as a product of Ukrainians winning on the battle lines. And if we started talking about battle lines, let's just jump straight into the map update and I'll tell you the situation for us starting this year. So to start off with, the biggest story is obviously how the New Year's celebration went for both Ukraine and Russia. Russia has sent a lot of missiles and a lot of Shahid drones to flight all over Ukraine, but because they run out of precision missiles and the Shahid drones are now being hunted very effectively, the results of it were not as significant, and unfortunately, again, we only had civilian objects hit, which is very unfortunate, and it does bring more suffering for Ukrainians, but it's again something that Ukrainians will just deal with. A lot worse situation is for Russians. Obviously, the most notable one is, if you can see here, right next to the city of Donetsk, is Makivka. And Makivka is where the like an old school building was overtaken by the Russian troops to serve as their base of, well, deployment essentially. It's where the newly arrived mobilized troops came into this area, and they just arrived there and just was like putting on their beds, and they're trying to get into some sleep and celebrate the new year, yada yada yada. And then the HIMARS missiles arrived. So as reports are suggesting, their total, it was 3 full packages of HIMARS missiles that struck this building. And there were up to 600 to 700 troops that were stationed in that building. Now, it is not given that all of them were inside the building. I'm expecting that some of them were outside, but even the Russian sources claim that the death toll comes into multiple hundreds. It is immense, and I usually don't cover strikes, but this is important because, firstly, it's also confirmation onto the fact that, yes, Russians are indeed storing the ammunition in the basements of some of the residential buildings. This is something I mentioned probably in August on how Russians are dealing with logistical problem of their supplies now being targeted, and I said that they're putting them into the basements. So here we see the situation. What happened is that, yes, there was a very 3 big packages, so 18 missiles from HIMARS that struck the subject, but also there was an ammunition depot right under the school buildings. Now, the Russian style, the Soviet style school buildings, they all have like a basement place, but it's not like a full basement. It's more of like a half basement type of thing. At least if it's similar to what kind of, at least it looked like from one of those buildings that I used to know. So that basement could be reached by missiles such as HIMARS, especially if there's a lot of them. That is a big news, but that was not the only one news, because I also during today received additional confirmations that it is actually happening this whole night. So Ukrainians were targeting like bases like these also on the southern front, also the northern front, and so on. So there were more strikes. They were obviously not as extensive, but that's why we're seeing that already a couple days in a row, we see that the Ukrainians are reporting numbers of over 700 Russians dead, which is amazing news, because the less Russians there are, the less people there are to pull the trigger to kill Ukrainians or shoot missiles at them. If you think that we should be fair to Russians and not celebrate their being dead, maybe they should get out of Ukraine. So let's talk about North Front Line. So in the north, not a lot of movement during the last couple of days. It was mostly artillery strikes. These couple of days were also extremely warm. And I think it's a good moment to mention that at the end of this week, Ukraine is expecting a cold snap. Now, the weather forecast is saying that the cold snap will last just for a couple of days. So I'm going to be very careful making any kind of predictions. But this might be a situation for Ukrainians to elevate. Especially this is important for Kreminna. Now, Kreminna, I already told you that Ukrainians are very close to in the positions to essentially, if they want to, they can really like push to encircle Kreminna. And this might happen. And Kreminna is important because Kreminna is something akin to, if you remember, Liman, right? I told you that as soon as Liman fall, that it would open essentially this whole area for Ukrainians to take. And now, months later, we can see this like, yes, this is indeed what happened because the next front, the defense lines were quite far. And it's kind of the same with Kreminna. If Kreminna falls, then pretty much a lot of these areas are now going to be available for Ukraine to contest. So Kreminna is a big gateway to this, pretty much this area. And some people even say that Svatove without Kreminna cannot hold as well because it's a kind of defensive line. So you cannot defend just the point on its own if there is no line supporting it. So essentially, if there is a flank from the south, then there is no chance of Svatove to fall. I am not sure enough if I can give that prediction, but Kreminna is definitely one of the contenders to fall if Ukraine will put effort in there during the coming cold snap. Now, in a couple of days, there has been some confusion because Russians have been attacking some new directions around Bakhmut, and especially around Soledar. And I want to explain why it's happening here. Now, we know that Ukrainians are trying to control the Yakovlivka direction, and the Russians are pushing towards Razdolivka, but this is mostly a deflecting attack because I think what their actual target is to attack Soledar from multiple directions. So we have reports that the Russians are attacking towards here, and the Russians are also attacking towards Krasnohora. People are saying because Pithorodny has not fallen, so that means that Russians are attacking kind of through the fields in between Bakhmut and Pithorodny, and then they kind of want to go around Bakhmut through the fields. It's an extremely stupid maneuver on its own because it's like this is just pure open terrain, and anyone with a drone or a copter can easily see whoever is moving through there and just target them. But at this moment, I don't even know what to say anymore because Russians obviously don't care how many of them people are dying, and they are using these tactics, right? So whenever we're assuming tactics before, and a lot of the analysts that I listened to, they were also considering that people would care about like will they lose men or will they keep the men. So if the side just doesn't care about how much men are gonna die, then it allows for unconventional tactics to be used, such as let's just go through the fields. So it's a potential threat. We should definitely be aware of this is potentially happening. But as far as we're aware that both of these attacks towards Soledar, both from the north and both through the Krasnohora direction here, they've been stopped. So so far this didn't succeed. And I wouldn't put too much attention to it because we obviously see that Russians are trying to, poke whichever direction they can to get any kind of ground. They are literally doing like a tower defense attacks, trying to find out where do you not have the towers set up. Bakhmut itself is fine; it's not threatened. There is additional fighting against Opetne again, obviously fighting around south of Klishivka, sometimes a little bit north of Klishivka. But it's all tactical, and right now, no major advancements. Again, for Bakhmut to fall, we need important things for Russians to capture. Klishivka needs to fall, Opetne needs to fall fully, and hills that are like a little bit to the west of Opetne needs to fall. That is a prerequisite. And from the north side, Soledar obviously need to fall, Krasnohora need to fall, and Pidhorne also needs to fall. That would basically make the north side also not attainable. It is not impossible, but I don't think that it's going to happen until Russians are sending in their prepared reinforcements of 200,000 from the north sides. We have some reports that Russians were trying to move towards Avdiivka through Opetne here, but they were stopped. So just a tactical positional warfare. And otherwise, this is mostly an artillery battle over the last couple of days. Now, I already talked about the fact that we are having a cold snap, and this obviously gives a potential for the southern offensive. People have asked, but does Ukraine have a lot of time to do it? We obviously need to be aware that Ukraine is preparing stuff. They can just utilize the two, for example, or so days that they are having to maybe do some kind of improvements to their positions. For example, we know that this area is being heavily targeted by Ukrainian strikes on the logistics, so they are deteriorating their defense. So maybe during the 2 days that Ukraine will have, they will try to advance all over the front line and see where the Russian positions are weak to maybe develop them into a more favorable positions for Ukrainians. For example, if Ukraine is able to take some parts of, I'm gonna just clear it out, some parts of this road, that would be really nice. Or if Ukraine would be able, maybe reach some of the checkpoints and so on, to reach them with the field artillery, again, would be really great. So maybe it will not end the campaign in 2 days, but Ukrainians definitely can use some time to improve their positions. With this said, thank you so much for watching. If you're here just for the map update, this is the first update of the year, and there will be more. And I will jump in to talk about some other things, because other things we have to talk about. Now, the first thing that I just wanted to comment on is some people were worrying because there was like a Russian Doomsday submarine. I mean, it's just a headline on the media website, so let's just like take it with a grain of salt. But the saying is like, oh, the journalists are reporting that this Doomsday nuclear submarine has disappeared from the port and now is somewhere out in the open. Let me translate what it goes from intelligence language. If a submarine disappears and is instantly reported that it has been that it disappeared, that means only one thing. That's like through the media, intelligence is just saying, "Hey, we know you're using it somewhere, and we're tracking it." That's me. Let me just like quickly convey you the understanding. So it disappeared maybe for the media, but it didn't disappear. I'm pretty sure that that submarine is being tracked as we're talking about this. Let's talk 2023, right? Last video we talked about what was the last year and what will be the 2023. And it's going to be a hard year. We now see fully that we are here for the long haul. It's going to be a long war, and it's going to be taking resources both from Ukraine and from us to defeat Russia. We need to understand that Russians, they've proven themselves to be essentially completely incapable to perceive reality, if you would put so, because over 100,000 Russians died, and they are still like, yeah, sure, whatever. While Ukraine is being killed, they are celebrating Ukrainian culture, to say the least, on their media channels. So they are completely deluded from reality. They don't want to follow this. So it's going to take a lot longer time to get to a common Russians. As for the elites of Russian elites, nothing is happening there right now. Whatever reports we're getting, it's mostly rumors. So there is nothing concrete. So it's going to take longer time for us to squeeze the Russians out. But the most important thing is that we finally introduced some actual measures of the Russian economy that works. The oil and oil products embargo that will still, part of it will come into effect on 2023 February, is really good. It's working. The oil cap, the price cap is also working. So I think we need to target more the things of Russian sectors that matters. And to kind of illustrate that, I want to show this picture here, where Russian, like it's a trade essentially balance between Russia and the European states. And when we're talking a lot about like that we need to cut our ties with Russia, we often forget that there's so many still companies and people and government entities that are trading with Russia. And while all of this is not on the left side, our job of introducing and talking to our politicians and sending messages and requesting it so is not done. So by looking at this chart, what I see is that the whole last year, we as Europeans have been still sponsoring a lot of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Despite I know that we did it like essentially to protect our own citizens, but we need to understand that we protected our own citizens by the blood of Ukrainian citizens. So we protected the pocket money and from for our citizens, but it's been a cost for Ukrainians as well. So definitely the sanctions and the cut off of Russia from trading is not done yet, and there's still a lot of things to do. As on the worst side of the alley, Russia is introduced mobilization. There will be more mobilization wave this year, and it's not going to change the war. We already see that it's not going to be able to change the war. But Putin is an opportunist, so he is dragging time to try to find an opportunity for him. So we're not going to see Russia turn the tides of war. It's pretty much impossible at this point, whatever they do, and it's just going to be more stalling. So war is a grinding, long process of Ukrainians just grinding through this long Russian military. Remember, Russian military is very long, but it's not that strong, and it's going to become weaker and weaker and weaker. It's just going to be a lot of buddies, and they're doing completely brutal campaign of just sending people to their deaths and in hundreds of thousands, because no army in the world would be okay fighting by also losing like over 1,000 people dead or wounded every day. Like imagine US military says, oh, we have like over 1,000 dead or wounded this day, and it's gonna go on for another half a year or more. So that's the message. It's going to be a long and grindy war, but don't worry. I will keep you updated. I will keep you motivated. I will explain to you when you will be in doubt. So stay subscribed to this channel, like and follow me as well, and share this to your media so more people will see it. And one of the last important topics that I want to mention is that people are mentioning sometimes, but what about Syria? What about other, hot zones that we have in the world? People are suffering there. We need to understand that Russian situation is not in competition with those. A lot of these terrorist regimes around the world are actually sponsored by Russia, like for example Assad regime. If there would not be a Russia that would be this has this terrorist mindset, that would be okay sponsoring complete atrocities on the world stage, if we would be dealing with Russia and sanctioning Russia when it mattered, and we would not trade Russia and give it money, then that money would not end up into weapons that would be sent to Assad pockets. That the companies that are producing equipment for our Europeans would not go to Russia, into their tanks, into the drones, into everything, and then we find out now Iranian drone infrastructure and Iranian missile infrastructure is also based on the European and American technologies, which is, what are we doing then? So we need to grow ourselves morally this year. We need to find out in ourselves what morality means for us. Do we continue supporting inhuman regimes that are just looking for us to be weak so they can target ourselves? This is a question of our own personal security, and I hope we will learn it over this coming year. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for people that are subscribing to Patreon, YouTube membership. Join them if you can. That would be amazing. And I love you all. Slava Ukraini, and I see you next time.